you know, first of all, Bob, thank you for inviting me. But listening to what we've been listening to, I want to tell you that in the room today is Joel Tater. And Joel gave my wife, my late wife, who battled cancer, we all know that, the first big job working on Two on the Town with, she was a producer, with Connie Chung and Steve Edwards. So that goes back a few years, and it's always great to see so many faces. I mean, can I say, as an old geezer I grew up with in Southern California, because I've been here for 50 odd years. So I know, and it's I mean, all the faces, Art and Marsha, and I'm sorry to miss George that I grew up with, and learned to appreciate what they did so spectacularly. Now, I was going to make a few jokes about geezers, and I wondered, Carolyn, what is a female geezer? Is it a geezette? Any idea, Carolyn?
No, but we argue about it a lot.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
Goddess.
Sorry, just a moment.
I would say goddess.
That's pretty good. Any advance on goddess? Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely, Barbara. That's perfect. I hate geezers.
Well, this is a kind of clumsy segue, but in the Beatles movie, A Hard Day's Night, their very first movie, one of the older gentlemen was referred to as a clean old man. Now, looking around, and that meant that you probably, in those days in England, took a bath once a week. But I can see there's a lot of clean old geezers, or just clean geezers, and also geezettes. Anyway, enough of this idle. Oh yeah, you're going to show a few. Here's some pictures of Brian Epstein. And Brian Epstein, alas, he died in 1967, was the man who took the Beatles from, I won't go through every picture, but Brian Epstein took them from grubby, greasy, leather-clad guys to the lovable legends that we know they are today. So I'll just give you a little bit of background as the question that Bob asked me. I wrote a book. It took me 50 odd years to write it. Why did it take me so long? And the answer very simply is, I was living, as all of you have lived, a very rich, and continue to live, a very rich life. I mean, my wife, my kids, and the job is very important, but there's more to life than the job. Sorry to tell you that, but you know it's true. And so I would tell people stories about my travels with the Beatles. They liked the stories, and finally, to be honest with you, soon after my wife died, I had to do something. The Beatles saved me. I wrote the book. So here we have some more pictures of the Beatles. And can I ask you this? Sorry, we're having a production conference, so just talk among yourselves. You're going to show a little bit of film, or... Okay, CBS. Go for the CBS package.
Do you have any fears that your public eventually will get tired of you and move on to a new favorite?
Well, they probably will, but, you know...
You ever think about
depends how long it takes for them to get tired.
American teenagers once helped repulse the British at Bunker Hill. The British invasion this time goes by the code name Beatlemania. D-Day has been common knowledge for months, and this was the day. The invasion took place at New York's Kennedy International Airport.
They're great. I think they're boss. What's a woman's opinion of the Beatles? A young woman's opinion, that is.
I think they're sharp.
What do you like the Beatles?
I know. They're taking money out of America and bringing it over to England, and we need money here.
Are you here to protest then?
Yes, I am.
Who came up with the name Beatles, and what does it really mean?
John thought of the name Beatles, and he'll tell you about it now. It means Beatles, doesn't it? You know, that's just a name. You know, like shoe. Means shoe.
The shoes. You see, we could have been called the Shoes for all you know.
An epidemic called Beatlemania has seized the teenage population, especially female.
He's got a beautiful nose.
He's got a beautiful nose.
Ringo has a sexy nose.
Some say the Beatles represent authentic British youth, self-confident, natural, direct, decent, vital, throbbing.
George has got sexy eyelashes.
Who has?
George has got sexy eyelashes.
Which one is George?
Sexy eyelashes. That one is beautiful. He's got sexy eyelashes.
Wherever the Beatles go, they are pursued by hordes of screaming, swinging juveniles.
Have you ever been this crazy about any other entertainer?
No, and that's what's so amazing. We don't know why we're like this.
Thousands of teenagers in every city and town stand in line all night to get tickets for their touring show. Girls faint when the tickets run out.
We came here at 6 o'clock in the morning, fascinating to see them, and all they do is push you farther and farther away, and then they don't even let you stay them.
You've been here since 6?
They symbolize the 20th century non-hero as they make non-music, wear non-haircuts, give non-mercy.
I don't care what anybody thinks. I love the Beatles for them, and I'll always love them. Even when I'm 105 and an old grandmother, I'll love them. And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrian from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart. I love you, Paul, and please come to the window so I can just see you. But I love you, and I want you, Paul. Please look at. And Ringo, you can look at too, because I like you.
How do you look back at these 3 weeks, and what do you think of the Beatles, really?
Well, the past 3 weeks have been, there's only one word, incredible. We've used it a lot. We're going to use it a lot more. And I every morning when I wake up, and every morning we get into a new town, I say, well, it can't get more hectic, it can't get more fantastic, and it does. Day after day, we sort of build up and continue to build up. I'm going to look back in a month's time and say, I'm sure it was a big dream. About the Beatles themselves, well, Larry and myself and those who managed to sort of travel with the boys on the plane, got to know them fairly well. This way we can chat to them. This is not necessarily a sort of harsh interview, but we found that they're pretty friendly, and they really are witty without facing cameras and without facing microphones. I have a great deal of admiration for all the Beatles. They've all got obviously different abilities, different talents, but generally they're 4 nice guys, to coin an American phrase.
Another question I wanted to ask you, doesn't it amaze you when you go from town to town and you see the same reaction? It's like you look at it as a phenomenon and something you may never see again.
Well, I don't think, of course I can't really say this now, but I don't think we will see it again. We may see modifications of this, but this is, as I say, incredible.
Has my voice changed? Whoa. What was that? Thank you very much for that endorsement. Davy Jones, yeah, well, another good talent, Monkeys and stuff. But that Bob pointed out to me as well, what a small world it is. My wife, Sally, Joel, and Cecilia all of them worked on Two on the Town, right? Right, Joel. Anyway, so I'm here to give you the 3-hour, 10-minute version of my travels with the Beatles. First point I should point out was that, as all of you know, most of you know, as a reporter, sometimes you don't know what's coming up tomorrow. And that's the excitement of the job. And that's what happened to me. By the way, Bob misinformed me. I sort of changed direction. I do this. Did you want me? Am I supposed to do Travels with Frank Sinatra, or is that Sons of Italy? Oh, sorry. Okay. I just was worried. Oh, okay. Well, fine. Okay. Then I'll get back to the Liverpool groups. I get, at my age, I get confused. Anyway, what do? I was bureau chief of the London Daily Express, which was a huge paper in the days when people actually read newspapers. Remember that? Back in the 20th century, anybody here remember the 20th century? Oh, too young. Anyway, so the Daily Express circulation in London, 4 million a day. They put me in the bureau in Los Angeles, and as a result of that, they called me one day and said, get to San Francisco, the boys are going on the first American tour. Go with them, travel with them, eat with them, sleep with them, drink with them. Also write George Harrison's column for him. Well, we all know about that. Musicians are not the greatest writers on the face of the earth. So that was my assignment. We were heading up to San Francisco, and the only thing I knew about the Beatles was that they'd been on the Ed Sullivan Show, had been a sensation. Brian Epstein, the guy you saw, the manager of the Beatles, said, we're going to hit America. He was very worried that they wouldn't go across. All the other British guys, Tommy Steele, anybody ever heard of Tommy Steele? I mean, they came and they went quickly. But the Beatles didn't. And when I arrived in San Francisco that day, and I know I've only got an hour and a half left, but when I arrived in San Francisco that day, I went to meet the Beatles, taken to see them by Derek Taylor, their press guy, and I met them, and they actually looked at me when I was introduced to them, and they grunted. And the reason they grunted was jet lag. Now, in those days, it took a heck of a lot longer to go from London to LA than it does today. So I got off to not a flying start, but I must tell you, on the whole trip, we became prisoners in the hotels. I went to the concerts. I sat in the front row. I could never hear a single word they sang because of screaming girls. And I also suffered from severe jelly bean damage. Now, those of you who've been to some concerts may know this, but the Beatles claimed that they loved jelly beans, George said. But if any of you know, and I know Bob knows this, that the jelly beans in England are soft and melty. The jelly beans in America are large and... What was that again? Bullet-like. Thank you. My God. Now, later on, at the end of this little talk, I'll show you the scars at the back of my neck. They're known as... I'm the only person in Southern California to have jelly bean scars as a result of Beatle destruction. Other than the fact that I could never understand a word they sang because of the noise, and the Beatles couldn't understand the word they sang. Seriously, so much noise that they lost places. And Ringo was singing I Want to Hold Your Hand, and John was singing another song. But Ringo became a good lip reader, and from then onwards, after reading lips, he knew which song they were singing. The noise was deafening. Okay, let's go to a couple of stories, because I know that you want to hear about LA. LA was always a terrific place. The Beatles played Hollywood Bowl. The concerts were all the same. The Hollywood Bowl, whether it was Shea Stadium, whether it was anywhere around the country in these 4 to 5 insane weeks of Beatle traveling. And by the way, I traveled in their private jet. I lived in the next room in their hotel suite. And they were prisoners, so they only had me to talk to and a few of the other radio guys that were DJs and pop guys to keep them company. So they were stuck with me. And so as a result of that, we got on very well. Because John would call me at 3 in the morning, that's John Lennon, by the way, in case you wondered, and he would say, come over, I want to play Monopoly, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I went. And I will reveal this to this select gathering that John Lennon playing, there he is. John Lennon playing Monopoly at 3 in the morning, cheated terribly. How did he cheat? He rolled the dice until he landed on the property he wanted. Now, any of you really believe John Lennon was a property tycoon? He was when he played Monopoly. So that was the Beatles. John was fantastic. He was a brilliant brain. He was a fast provocateur. He loved to needle you. And he had a sharp brain, a fast brain. And any of you who've interviewed like Robin Williams, who also had a jet speed brain, know what I'm talking about. Paul was, and I like to say this, there's an Irish expression that some of you may know. Paul was a gigantic schmoozer. He'd come along on the jet. He'd say, would you like a drink, Ivor? I said, give me a gin and tonic with a twist of lemon. And he served me a gin and tonic and twist of lemon. He made a very good waiter, by the way. But he went on to a better career. Now, George, I'll tell you very briefly. George was the man. He was kind of sullen. He was kind of fairly immature of all the Beatles. And the problem was I had to write a column for him under his name. And to be honest with you, he lived by what they call rocker time. Rocker time is that you go to bed at 3 and you wake up at 3. And my deadline for London was much earlier, so hard to tell you that I made up the first 2 columns. But George got me in the corner on the jet and said, your column is a load of old, he said shite, actually. Some of you can translate that. I said, yes, George, wake up, tell me what's going on. And from then onwards, we got along very well and the columns improved. And Ringo, still playing today. I saw him a year ago, 9 months ago. Ringo and his all-stars, very bright. Ringo played the drums rather well, by the way, but Ringo, again, wasn't the best singer. And Ringo today has other people on the show and does a great show. So that was the 4 Beatles. Now, I'm going to tell you one story that Bob asked me to tell you about LA. The Beatles were trapped in their hotel or in their rented houses, and one day a voluptuous lady by the name of Jane Mansfield came knocking at their door. Brian Epstein said it was too late. Jane wanted to meet the Beatles. Jane was kind of, was one of the first exponents of that celebrity habit, I think it's called wardrobe malfunction. And so Brian said no. John rather liked the look of Jane. Can't blame him, I suppose. And the next day, they went to the Whiskey A Go-Go as guests of Jane. Well, unfortunately, Paul was off canoodling with a young lady called Peggy Lipton, actress, so he never went. But John and Ringo and George showed up at the Whiskey A Go-Go to see this show as guests of Jane Mansfield. They were trapped in the booth at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And I don't know if any of you have been to the Whiskey A Go-Go, they probably still have the same booth. Well, to cut a long story short, they were getting a bit upset because all of a sudden the dreaded paparazzi showed up. Remember those? Maybe they weren't called paparazzi, or maybe they were because that was made in that wonderful movie, Italian movie. So let's call them the paparazzi. And one guy from the Examiner, I think it was before it became the Herald Examiner, the Examiner, and I've forgotten his name, it's in my book, came up close, and those of you who remember photographers had cameras the size of refrigerators. Remember those? You put a bulb in, and you stuck it up your nostril and snapped it, and you sort of half blinded whoever got their picture taken. So George was getting a little bit drunk, and George was getting a little bit PO'd, and George said, rather politely, well, maybe not too politely, would you please leave us? But this photographer decided not to. He moved in closer, took another picture. George, somewhat inebriated, picked up his drink and threw it at the photographer. However, it missed the photographer and it hit another lady known for her slightly less wardrobe malfunction called Mamie Van Doren. She screamed. The Beatles, the three Beatles realized, along with Jane, that things were not going as well. They lifted them over a couple of bodyguards from the hotel, from the nightclub, lifted them over, and they were whisked away as poor Jane found that it was a destroyed evening. Mamie Van Doren had to, find some towels, and the next day, I remember we were on the plane leaving LA, and George saw the picture on the front page of the Examiner as we flew out of LA of the flying drink which doused that lovely lady. So that was their whiskey a go-go trip. Now I don't know how much time I've got left, but people say to me, was the Beatle music great? Well, I mean, look at it today. I mean, it's unbelievable. Who doesn't know a great Beatles song, as we all hear? But the Beatles never thought they would last that long. I mean, George, he didn't know what he was going to do. But I want to tell you that what happened was that I asked Ringo at the end of the tour, at the end of the successful, incredible tour, what were you going to do? And he said, I'll probably open a hairdressing salon. I mean, that was the limits of their excitement. And the reason he wanted a hairdressing salon was that his girlfriend of the time, who he eventually married, and the Beatles married their girlfriends, because in them days, if you got somebody pregnant, you better marry them. But anyway, so what happened was he was going to buy a hairdressing salon for his girlfriend. Paul said he would write music for somebody else, and that was the kind of feeling that they had. They thought they would last 5 years. I've told you a little bit about the concert scene, Insanity, Screaming Girls. I mean, what you saw on the screen a few minutes ago was exactly what happened. It was insanity. It was a madhouse. Now, as I say, I don't know if anybody will have any questions, but I want to say, kind of winding it up a little bit, that the only thing that I regret about 1964 was that I didn't take my iPhone camera with me. So I want to say thank you very much for listening. I don't know if we have time, Bob, for a question, but I'd be very happy to tell you and talk to you.
The book is a delight. It's a wonderful read. And if you like the way that he speaks in person, you'll especially like the book. There's some absolutely wonderful stories. Anybody got questions? Don't run away here, Ivor. Come back. Anybody got questions?
Marvin has a question. Yeah.
Hi, Ivor. Hi. It was a pleasure meeting you. That was a great speech. Thank you so much for the stories. I know that they couldn't hear each other on stage, and that's one of the reasons why they stopped touring. Did they make any remark during that time already that they were going to give up?
Yes. To be honest with you, after the second tour, they were fed up. As you pointed out, the Beatles wanted to be known and heard for their music. And John would say to me, you know, we're like, he used the F word quite a bit, and he said, we're like circus midgets. We're performing fleas. And we don't want that. We want people to appreciate us for our music. Now, I must say, talking about the music, if I may just expand very slightly, the music to start off with was fairly what I would call lollipop music. I mean, it was, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and stuff like that, and She Loves Me, yeah, yeah, yeah. Not the kind of music that some of the other songs that by the time Sgt. Pepper album came along, which is 50 years ago this month, Sgt. Pepper, they had been absolutely honed brilliantly by George Martin. I mean, listen to Sgt. Pepper's music, and it's experimental, it's different. And in those days, it was all lollipop stuff, and they did a lot of Long Tall Sally and stuff like that, which was other people's songs. But they had an exuberance, an excitement about them that is just, I mean, somebody said to me, and I'll ask you this question. Somebody said to me, we're doing 50th anniversary events for the Beatles. Tell me, if you would, 50 years from now, Kelly, which entertainer will they be celebrating?
The Beatles. What are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about I'm talking about the musicians of today, the singers of today.
Dylan.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Yeah, but Dylan is an old geezer. But look at I badly put the question. Beyonce. Okay. So what other talented musicians that are performing today that you've heard of? Not Justin, what's his name, or the other Justin. I always get them confused. But which musicians of the last 5 to 10 years will be celebrated 50 years from now? Can anybody give me a name? Beyonce? Who?
Springsteen.
Bruce.
Yeah, but Bruce is another mediumly old geezer. Prince, yeah, but Prince is no longer with us. I'm talking about talented artists. Anyway, the point made. Lady Gaga, maybe Lady Gaga. Maybe. Okay, we'll carry on this discussion a bit later on. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thanks, Bob.
Hey, one more thing, and this is a journalistic story, and I want to compliment him because in reality, we know that the people that were on the plane for that tour, as in any kind of rock performance, they were there to basically glorify the Beatles. They were not there to tell out-of-school stories or embarrassing things that happened. And as I started reading through the book, I kind of wondered, is he going to make a point of saying that, yeah, they took us on this trip because they basically wanted puffery. Is he going to address that and be honest and say that, yeah, some of the things they didn't talk about, and there was some self-censorship. And I got to the part of the book, and he devotes almost a chapter to that, where he discusses the role of a journalist in covering this kind of thing in that kind of atmosphere. And I'm just wondering if you could talk briefly about that.
Well, very briefly, about less than a quarter into the tour in Las Vegas, for example, we heard a story about the cops being called to the Sahara Hotel because John had an underage couple of young ladies in his apartment, in his suite. Now, did anything go on? I don't know. But the mother, who was somewhat inebriated and left her daughters to go and hang out with the Beatles, came back, called the cops. The cops came in, the sheriff, Clark County sheriffs investigated, and apparently nothing took place. And I think today, in today's milieu, today's internet, where you sneeze in North Hollywood and they hear it in North Korea within 3 seconds, in today's milieu, some of the stories, the semi-scandals, might have been avoided when we were covering it, because we knew, to be honest with you, that if we wrote negative stories, they would throw us off the plane, even though we may have paid for our ticket. And we did pay for our ticket to ride, and it was probably, I don't know, a ridiculously overpriced $300 for the whole trip. But listen, I stayed at the Plaza Hotel with the Beatles, and my hotel bill, which I happened to uncover not long ago, was $16.50. So come on. But the idea was that you wouldn't do negative stuff then. And things have changed a great deal, as Bob points out by posing this question. Today, anything goes, and as I say, any scandal is out there. I'm not sure whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, because we're on to freedom of the press, and should you tell the truth or should you shave the truth, but it was a very different situation, and I knew that my access, and I could walk into John's room and get a drink from his table, from his little, whatchamacallit, the freezers, you know, the overpriced
Mini bar.
mini bars. Yes, thank you. Well, some of you have hit the mini bars, I can see. But anyway, so that was the different thing, and you know, you watched your P's and Q's a fair bit, but you still had a fantastic time, and I had a fantastic time. It took me 50 years to find out it was a fantastic time, and that's why I'm here. So again, thank you for the questions, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, Ivor. The book is The Beatles and Me on Tour by Ivor Davis. He'll be in the back of the room. He'll be happy to talk to you individually if you want to buy a book, if you don't want to buy a book, but he's happy to sign it. And I thank him for being here. One thing I want to show you. This is the badge that Cecilia wore to these luncheons. And we miss her greatly. And I'm indebted to George for being here to tell her story. Thank you very much. Thank you to Ivor Davis. I thank you all for being here. Thank you for considering the 8-Ball Welfare Foundation, which does so much for so many journalists. And to have you all here means a great deal to me and to each of you here. We all have old friendships and new because of this great group. And just to think it started 7 years ago. And now we have 395 people on the mailing list, and anywhere from 60 to 100 people that come to these lunches. And it means a great deal to see you. Thanks for making the effort. Thanks for being in contact. We have the room till 3. Please visit, and please return your badges to Michael and John and Gary as you go out the door. And we really appreciate you being here. See you next time. Have a great afternoon.